Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we have an interview with very special guest Natalie. Natalie, do you want to talk about what you do and how you found the carnivore diet?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. So I'm a 16-year clinical psychotherapist, and I work in the space of both gut-brain connection. So gut-brain axis, helping people heal and reverse their mental health issues, physical health issues, but specialize in self-image and nutritional psychology. So yeah, and I've been a carnivore now, full carnivore, so zero plants, zero carb now for over 3 years.
Wow,
Oh
that's
wow.
wow.
Hey, and not dead.
Thriving.
Sorry.
So
Yep.
yeah, the first question, how you mentioned the gut and mind connection. Do you want to kind of briefly break that down
Yeah.
into the simplest terms possible for someone new out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we think about, when someone goes to therapy and, we're talking about psychological therapy. So, we're kind of just looking at our head, right? So you go off to therapy, you have a chat, whatever's going on for you. But then what happens is no one ever asks people what they eat.
Mm.
So, foundationally, our gut, which is what I call our first brain, which literally controls, it's our nervous, everything. It's our nervous center, everything that conduces our neurotransmitters. And if it's not looked after and it's not fueled and fed correctly with the right amino acids to create the neurotransmitters, talking to a starving brain doesn't really work very well. So, 16 years ago when I started in this field, I started down the psychology model and it just didn't make sense to me because I was just like, well, how can we just keep talking to people that are going home and feeding themselves with toxic food and they're not getting the right nutrition? So for me, that was kind of when I went to a seminar and I met a psychotherapist who was also, back then they called it, orthomolecular medicine and psychonutrition, whereas now it's nutritional psychiatry, which is also an additional qualification that I'm currently doing as well. Um, it literally is about educating people on mental health, physical health, all starts in the gut and what we fuel ourselves with, not just even, what we're putting in our mouth, but auditory, visually, everything around us that plays a part in developing our metabolic health.
Yeah. That's so interesting because I've seen a psychologist before and she's good, but a lot of the time it's not nutrition based, it's more the mental stuff, which is still good, like setting
Yeah.
goals and your thought processes. But I mentioned that I was on the carnivore diet and it just fixed so many things and they didn't really know why. So I think it's quite interesting that, there's that gut to microbiome connection. And how's that been for you in terms of transitioning from a sort of standard psychologist or psychotherapist to then introducing this gut microbiome? Do your patients sort of get a bit confused or?
Well, that's kind of where I've been like the whole time. So when I started psychology and I got a year in and then I met that psychotherapist and he just said, you know what, you've really got to look at that gut brain. And none of the psychology models ever talked about that. So I was just like, yeah, I don't want to do that for 4 years and then have to do another 4 years and then, combine it all and I'll be really old and it'll just be really a long time. So I decided to pull back from that after a year and then just kind of rerouted myself back to looking at what nutrition is. So really nutritional psychology, psychotherapy, clinical hypnosis, understanding the mind and the brain, but also too, as I said, the gut. And what you just said then too, Daniel, is really, really important is, you know, we can talk to this part and we can go through thoughts, feelings, and reactions. However, we're generally talking in consciousness, right? And a lot of times that's okay for people, but people who are really deep rooted in very deep set behaviors or addicted
Yep.
to junk food,
Mm.
that's only going to work for a certain amount of time and they're going to get frustrated and not feel like they're healing. And also to the body's put over here and the head's put over there. And it's like, no, we've got to join them together. Um, and I always say, you can never think as far as your body feels. So if your body is feeling really bad, because again, no fault of anybody, but the fact is, a lot of people don't understand what real nutrition is. And it's not found generally in the middle aisles of a supermarket.
Mm. We
Yeah.
hear a lot about having like a really diverse gut microbiome. What are your kind of thoughts on that? So a lot of people might say, oh, you have to get all your food groups, all your vegetables to have a diverse gut microbiome so you can be happy and healthy. How would you kind of respond to that?
I'll always question the narrative behind it and who paid for that information and where that comes from. So, again, we've really got to dig deep into, well, who said so? Is that driven by Sanitarium? Is it driven by the Kellogg's group? And a lot of our food dietary guidelines are all actually driven, and I don't know if you know this, but by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So a lot of the actual, and someone that you can actually, if you don't know who she is, her name is Belinda Fetke. She's a powerhouse in research of linking these things together. So I will always question that. And again, the recommendation of what is a balanced diet, that comes from the big food companies to basically, all balanced, it all looks good. However, it's the same with moderation. Moderation to me is BS. You don't have a moderate amount of disease or a moderate amount of type 2 diabetes if you're eating carbs and you're intolerant to them. So again, it's just digging through the dogma and where does that come from? And, like a lot of my clients will go from a really sad diet, which is the standard Australian diet, down to a very low carb, but heavy base protein and fat. But some will go straight into a carnivore, zero carb, plant free, because that's where their body's at and that's where their mind's at. So again, it's unique processing, again, around self-image and food psychology and attachments to food. What we've tended to have lost is we've become so attached to food as a part of our identity to lose weight, and that's where it starts, versus being connected to food to actually serve your mental and physical health.
Okay. Yeah, I was reading this book. You've probably heard of it. It's called The GAPS Diet by Natasha Campbell.
I do. I have it here. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was reading through it, and they're talking about, like, obviously specific diets for the microbiome and stuff. And they incorporate a bit of they say you can incorporate a bit of nuts and legumes and stuff a bit, or a bit of vegetables. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think that the best diet is just strict carnivore for your patients, or how do you go about
For me,
that?
in the space that I work in, and if we go back to the microbiome, I think also too, it's been a bit of a fancy word, and it's kind of a bit of a, let's put in inverted commas and just kind of put it out there in front of everybody. But the microbiome is just not what we eat. It's also, our environment, it's toxicity, it controls everything, right? So in the space from around mental and physical health and people struggling with their identity and, just really sick of doing the old model, it's quite unique. So I will always go to a foundation of stripping everything back so they can start feeling the power in their body, because and as you guys know, like, it's very difficult to quantify in words what happens in your body and your mind when you actually go into a carnivore way of eating. So you'll also never hear me say carnivore diet, because diet creates an unconscious reaction in most people with diets that they've been on before that haven't worked. So again, that's an unconscious reaction, which we don't want people to stay in. But for me, it's about, let's reset, lets you get back empowered, get clear, get out of the restriction and the control, and get into some food freedom and feed that gut. And I always allow my clients to go, you know what? If you feel amazing and you want to go out and you want to choose, we're not talking about a treat day. We're not talking about falling off the bandwagon. Choose. Be powerful in your choice. And if you want some nuts or seeds or chips, whatever, you can, sure, have them, but understand the feedback that you'll get and honor the feedback. So, for example, I'll give you a client. She hadn't had bread, obviously, been carnivore for 6 months, went out and had bread and was in a very, very depressive flat state for 4 days. And that was the only thing she added back in. So every single person is unique with programming and, programming and what's going on in their body. It's about freedom of choice, but choosing to understand, well, if I'm going to have that, that may not make me feel very good.
Yeah. So do you think that the benefits of the carnivore diet, do you think that, in terms of your field as well, do you think that they actually come from obviously there's the effect of the gut microbiome connects to your brain and makes you feel good. Do you think it's that, and also giving your brain the fatty acids and the nutrients that it needs? Do you think it's a combination of both working together?
From all the studies and research that I've done, it all comes back to being in ketosis. So again, it's the brain being using ketones. And, I know this is quite a controversial topic because a lot of people believe that glucose is the preferred brain source. But if you look at kind of the literature and stuff, and, people like Chris Palmer and Georgia Ede, they'll always say that, ketones are the best thing for the brain. And if you ask a carnivore within, or, ancestral way of eating, within a month, everyone that I've ever spoken to said, oh my gosh, it's like 1,000 light bulbs going off in my head. And that's never happened prior to having glucose. So again, microbiome, it's something that I always say to people: if you feel amazing, you're sleeping and you're operating at your potential, guess what? Your body's functioning at the primal state.
It seems like you've been, with your patients, you kind of work through a lot of weight loss and, like you were saying, self-image kind of things. So do you kind of work with people to stop their binge eating and that kind of thing as well?
Yeah. So disordered eating,
food
psychology and attachment. So also teaching people how their minds work. So as Daniel asked me earlier, like being in this space and, asking people even 16 years ago, 2 questions. Do you know how your mind works and why it does what it does? And the second thing is, tell me what you eat. Very bizarre questions you could imagine 16 years ago. And it's still strange now because people just don't understand that, hold on, why is she asking me that? But again, it's teaching them the deep root cause. So I treat the deep root cause. I don't treat the symptoms. So it's about teaching people their unconscious self-image in their cognitive programming phase, which is 0 to 7, which is where we learn all of our beliefs and our value structures about self, including how we eat. And most people, their mums have been on a diet, and that's the culture that we get into, but we've reversed it. Instead of, really using food as nourishment, we've used food historically as comfort, eating through emotion. It could be a cultural thing, but also using food as a punishment to lose weight. So, and that gets very disconnected from self.
I absolutely just love everything you just said, like, because I've also adopted that mindset that a lot of the issues in your life, that's not usually the issue. It's just a symptom of the root cause, which is your mental health or your poor nutrition. So I love that you said that. Like, it just sparks something in my brain. What do you think is the root cause of for people who binge eat and stuff and those sort of disorders? Yeah, what's your sort of approach with that?
Poor and conflicted self-image, which has been developed between the ages 0 to 7. And, every single human being on the planet is programmed by anyone in authority to them. And we don't have the ability to analytically filter out anything, right? So we just get all of that and we believe at a root cause, that's who we are. So, when we see people on diets or, even food, like if food used as treats, is horrendous when kids get told, if you don't eat your dinner, you're not going to get your dessert. Or if you fall over, then it's, oh, here's a piece of chocolate. So we're dysregulating our emotions through food attachment. And then what happens is our self-image that we look in the mirror is, if it doesn't equate to the external validation that we've learned, as in our mind will always go externally to get validation because that's what we're told, right? So it's about understanding the connection between, well, what did the mind learn unconsciously around your self-image, to be conflicted about how you use food and or your thinking. So thought, feeling, reaction around self, and how to calm that down is, one, getting people to see it and feel it and change it, but also treating the body and getting the body nourished, because you have to join them together. You must.
Yeah, I found that definitely myself. Like, whenever I'd celebrate something, I'd always eat horribly. Yeah. And whenever something was going wrong, I'd also eat horribly. So it's just not healthy at all. And yeah, you definitely see a lot of the negative effects from that. And that could just create a habit to do that every single time you have a victory, every single time you have a failure.
You use food as the external outcome, right? So that's the mind's way of, well, if you're going to build a neural pathway of every single time I do something good, let's just validate myself first, but let's not have an outcome attachment or an anchor to it. So it's the same thing if you have a bad day at work, or you're in the traffic and you get get to work and you're like, oh my God, I'm so stressed. So what your mind does, it goes, oh, so the last time you were stressed, you ate a muffin and then you went and had a coffee that was loaded with sugar and, almond milk. So
Yeah.
you literally, most people, 90% of the time, you're on autopilot mode, but we actually are in a waking state of hypnosis. So we're actually hypnotizing ourselves every single time we do the action. So your mind goes, oh, for example, what you said, like if you've had something really exciting happen and you get an emotional reaction in your body, and that's like, oh, this is really important. So every single thing that your mind is doing is taking images and pictures and thoughts and feelings about you. But then the external outcome of that is if you anchor that with food, guess what happens every single time you have that feeling? Your mind goes, oh, let's go to the food. The other thing that's quite interesting is your body actually doesn't know where it is. It's only your thinking, thoughts, and reactions that create the chemical reaction in your body. So your unconscious is a series of your programs on default mode. And a lot of them don't serve anybody because they're not yours, right? So if you think about anything in the past, your mind, and once you kind of work how it all works, your body will automatically react whenever you think about something in the past, right? Your body's not in the past, it's right here in the present. But you can create anything in your body with how your mind is directed in what I call the thousands and thousands of files that you have about yourself unconsciously. Same thing in the future. You could think about the future and your body reacts with anxiety. You're not in the future, you're right here. The power of understanding where your mind goes, but a lot of it is unconscious, so your body will just follow. It's really, really important to be able to be conscious and reframe the thoughts, feelings, reactions, and images, and build a new neural pathway that your mind goes, oh, okay, now this is deemed more important. So we're not going to filter it with the other outcomes of anchoring with food.
How can we actually kind of bring ourselves into a conscious state? Is there any strategies, or is actually hopping on a carnivore diet one of those strategies to
it is part of it, yeah,
get more conscious?
Yeah, because it calms the body down, so I always say to people, we have a choice of eating a very chaotic way or a very calm way. And that's one of the most things that I hear from people, even 2 weeks in, and they'll be like, oh, I am so calm and I don't have that flat depressive feeling, right? So once you get a little window of that, now if I'm talking to someone that's felt like that for 20 years and they've had a window within a 2-week period of going, whoa, I feel different, it allows the mind then to go, whoa, what is this new feeling we have here? And it empowers the person to be really proud of themselves, which is another thing that people don't do. They never acknowledge how, when they do really good things, they'll always just talk or feel about the negative, right? So it is a definite correlation between getting that body working, and then the mind can go, oh, this feels really good. And the person feels good.
Would you say that being more conscious would mean you're being more in the present moment, and then when you're unconscious, you're more in the unpresent, sort of like?
So I'll tell you how it works. So for example, when you go to get in the car, right, to drive, you don't think about driving the car, right? You just drive the car.
Yeah.
You've learned that program whenever you were 16 or 17. So you're now unconsciously driving the car. Yep. The only time you're conscious is if someone swerves in front of you and you're like snapped back into the present moment, or you're at a light and it goes red or green. They are the slight slivers of moments that you are in consciousness. So what I teach people to do is to create the gaps between conscious programming and unconscious, to start changing thoughts, feelings, reactions, opinions, and build new neural pathways. So if you think about driving a car automatically, that's what you're doing with all of your beliefs, all of your values, all of your structures around yourself that you've been given in a self-image from authority figures.
So what other techniques sort of would you implement, such as carnivore diet, to be more conscious? Stuff like maybe meditation or something? Or?
Meditation, but what I tend to do is I incorporate what I call stillness. So a lot of people will go, oh, I can't meditate, I'm doing it wrong. What it is, it's about a preconceived idea about what that looks like, sounds like, feels like to the person. But I'll also let everyone know, every single person, whether or not you had siblings in the house either, you will program and perceive everything very differently, right? Every single person is unique in how they actually program themselves. Like I said, hypnotize themselves. So stillness basically involves, so for example, sitting your body down and retraining it not to want to move. Because most people, when you sit still, what does your body want to do? It starts itching, your mind wanders off, and then you just go, oh my God, I'm so frustrated. So then you start to get anxious. It's about retraining your mind. It's kind of like training an animal. If you tell an animal to sit, it'll sit. If you keep training it, and then when you tell it to move, it'll move. Your mind's no different. But what I tend to do in that stillness is when people's minds, so that you're in your mind generally with all your thoughts, feelings, and reactions, teach people to push it outside of themselves and to watch it. Don't be a participant. That is getting you into conscious behavior. So you're not engaging, you're actually just being an observer. Now, if you grab onto it, that's a different thing. But stillness is literally about just sitting still, redirect your conscious thoughts back to the present moment. And how I get people to do that is I use a process called and now. So the minute that you start wandering away or you want to kind of move, I'll tell people to say and now, which brings you back to consciousness, because you can't go anywhere when you say and now. Your mind's blank. So the more that you do that, the more that you then become the master of your unconscious instead of it driving you. Yeah. And all the other kind of psychotherapy work and deep rooted value work and that I do with people as well. Yeah. Getting people into responding, not reacting.
Okay.
Yeah. And that helps with carnivore too, because your body's calm, right? And it's being fed right.
Exactly. Yeah. A question about that kind of consciousness. Do you feel that we have kind of worsened our ability to be present in the moment and be able to clinically analyze our thoughts and these habits? Do you think we've gotten worse at that in the last few decades? And if so, what do you reckon's caused it?
Absolutely. Well, it's the increase of, hyper-processed food, seed oils, that is really not helping the brain function correctly, but also too, the excessive amount of dopamine that reacts every single time you eat something that's full of junk. The other thing is, when we also look about, what TVs have done, what screens have done, what phones have done, that also takes you out of conscious behavior and just triggers your dopamine all the time. So for example, if someone's on Facebook and they get an alert all the time, it's just dink, 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 and we're on it and we're on it. That's a dopamine center that's firing all the time. And long-term, that's not a good thing, because what happens is your threshold for joy becomes higher and higher. So if you're not activating that all the time, and again, if you're eating to support that behavior, it's an addiction. And that's why when I work with people who are like, can't stay on a diet, or I don't have any willpower, and it's like, well, actually, it's not that. It's your body's addicted to the bliss point of social media and food. So once we derail that and make them realize there's nothing wrong with you, your just body is physiologically addicted. So we've got to allow use tools and strategies so that dopamine's not going off. We're a very dopamine dominant society, which long-term is not going to help at all.
So in the topic of sort of this dopamine and this instant hits, that sort of ties into my next question about something that I've also been like diagnosed with, ADHD, and that. What's your thoughts on ADHD, and what's your thoughts on that?
Well, again, like I said, everyone's unique, and I would always back travel to, long-term gut health, and also to, all the literature that I've read. Some of it is like you're born with it, some of it is you isn't. It's the same with depression. Do I believe you're born with it? No. Do I believe that you are programmed into it, both mentally and physically? Yes. Because a lot of the time depression is just about, again, gut-brain axis connection. It is about understanding the connection of why you're doing what you're doing to get either the hit or what you're using it for. With ADHD, Daniel, it's one of those things that is so broad. And it's the same with autism, right? Or even depression or anxiety or long-term disorders. They are so broad because every single person has got a long-term psychological history and biological history. So in where I work, I normally would say with things like that, let's look at the deep root cause of long-term malnourishment. That's where I kind of come from.
So do you think, for example, I have ADHD, or I've been diagnosed it with, and after 3 months in the carnivore diet, so many of my negative symptoms have just lifted, no brain fog. But I think I still have that personality where I'm a bit impulsive. So do you think that malnourishment from a child, or like when you're growing up, not getting those B vitamins or omega-3s and stuff, do you think that that could actually
huge,
maybe not cause it, but increase ADHD?
It definitely can, exacerbate what's there that's kind of not firing. Again, when we look at the psychological structure of someone and their own self-image, and as you said, what was the word you used? Instant
gratification.
Yeah, no. So when you said all your other symptoms have gone down, but you also said that you're impulsive. Sorry.
Yeah, I still have that positive, like I still have the positive traits, like impulsiveness,
Yeah. So again, I would go, okay, so what does that look like, sound like to you, to your unconscious and to your conscious, right? And then secondly, it's about going, okay, so we've got to be really mindful of when we get labeled with things as an identity. And also two, it's about going, well, if I don't have this, who am I without it? And that's a lot of the time I deal with people with anxiety and depression. They're like, well, I've had it for so long, I've got no idea. And it's actually quite fearful because they don't know how to operate without this backpack on them, right? So I'll always challenge that thinking around, well, is it because of the label, or is it just because, you know what? This is just a part of, where is my impulsivity coming from? What's it driven to? What's the outcome? What's the anchor? Does that make sense?
Yeah, man, you're hitting everything on like the nail on the head. It's everything you're saying.
Thanks.
Yeah. With that, what you're talking about people being diagnosed with depression or anxiety, and they kind of have that label. Do you think that kind of being diagnosed with depression or anxiety reinforces that feeling in people, and it feels like they're stuck and they can't get out?
Well, again, we've got to go to the authority figures of when we're going in and we're feeling really flat. Or, I also have people that have situational depression, right? They're just going through a storm. And unfortunately, the medical industry these days, within 1.2 seconds, they're handing out antidepressants to someone. But I'm like, well, hold on. If we look at the serotonin production, so over 97% of the serotonin that you make is in your gut, and also 50% of the dopamine that you make is in your gut, right? And how do we make those things? We have to make them from amino acids, which come from food. So the essential amino acids, and that's why when you look at the connection between depression and anxiety, there is both a food connection, but a psychological connection to the identity and the label of, well, I've got this. And then they get told, unfortunately, that they have to live with it for the rest of their lives, which is not the case at all. And I don't know if you've looked at Chris Palmer's work, but, he treats, high-end schizophrenic clients and type 2 bipolar with a ketogenic diet. And guess what happens? It disappears. It reverses.
I've heard seizures too. They treat seizures as well.
Yes. So like epilepsy with, yep. Heaps. So, that's the power of understanding ketosis on the brain. And, again, as I said, there is going to be caveats around, medication resistance. But, I'd like to see, before I leave the world, that, lifestyle and food back to primal ancestral eating is a first line defense first, but also to helping people understand, well, why is my mind doing this? Why is my thinking like this? And who am I? Because most people are so concerned about what other people think of them. And that's not a great space to live. No one really has a relationship with themselves because we're not programmed that way. So if
what's
I
the
asked you guys now, for example, right, if I would use the word relationship, where does your mind go, Daniel? Where does it travel to?
girlfriend, boy, like girlfriend, parents? Yeah.
Yeah, Ed?
Yeah, exactly the same.
It went external. What's the most important relationship you should have?
Self.
The one with yourself. So the word relationship and the way that we hear and feel and program words, 90% of human race, everything is externalized through validation. But guess what? Once again, it's stimulus outside, cause and effect. But if you don't have a great relationship with yourself, we're also mirroring everything outside of ourselves.
So how do you think the sort of solution to this would be? Because I know that there's a lot of programming. Do you think it would be actually getting away from, not from society, but just heavily getting off technology and just, what do you think, just changing a thought process?
Well, again, I think of the things as like social media and they're all externalized things. But if you're operating from a poor and conflicted self-image and you're gratifying yourself or you're addicted to that adrenaline, that's going to be a problem. So again, I'll always teach people to go, if you have a very positive self-image about yourself and you have a great relationship and you love yourself and you're doing everything, talk to yourself well, feed yourself well, all of that external stuff becomes quite disattached. So you don't actually connect to it. If you go into it, you're in a far better space to understand, hold on, this is really boring now and I'm over it. Because we're flipping it around to verse, well, that's not the driving force. Yeah. I've had people that have been addicted to, to Instagram and Facebook. And then about 6 weeks in, they're like, I can't be bothered. I'm like, great, excellent.
What's it like seeing the success of patients and seeing their lives change? What's it like?
That's why I do what I do, and just Ed, when you were asking me before about a client, she's had disordered eating for a long time and would weigh herself up to 4 times a day, count calories, like just full on every day, just in a food thought restriction. 5 weeks into carnivore, throughout the scales, no more calorie counting, no more thinking about food, total food freedom, doesn't care.
Yeah.
Wow.
Amazing. It's amazing. But again, working with me, it's very challenging and it's very confronting. But again, it's about, giving my clients the tools and the strategies to understand who they are and why they're doing what they're doing. And they're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just that you've got to actually understand what and how you work.
Yeah, for a lot of those clients that are going to the carnivore diet, is it an easy process or is it sometimes a bit tricky for people? And do you have any tips for anyone like starting the carnivore diet, psychological tips to actually stick to it and be consistent?
Yeah, look, it really depends on where they are personally. So a lot of the time I've got people that are going, I'm just done. I can't live like this anymore. I've heard about this. Let's just go. So we go straight in. But I definitely take them through a 3 kind of 90-day, 3 adaptation stages so they understand what they're in for and what's going on with their body. So follow them every week with that. Some people will come to me and go, okay, let's just do low carb. That's fine. I think one of the biggest, challenges for people is to actually understand that every single thing that you've learned around food, especially like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and eating snacks and eating every 3 hours, and meat and fat is only what you're going to eat. It's unraveling those attachments and thinking that, oh my God, I'm going to die. and or something tragic's going to happen. But again, if someone's got a really, really bad gut, I'll treat it a little bit different and we'll work with it. But most people that don't in that phase, it's also letting go of the external attachments to thoughts, feelings, and reactions of family, and what people are going to think about what's on your plate, right? And I always say, your mental and physical health is not a community project. So whatever goes on your plate, if that's fueling you and functioning you to the most optimal health, it's no one else's business. So I just have so many people that are fearful, right? Of going, oh my God, what am I going to do when I go out and my family say something? I'm like, and now. Yeah. I find most people in the first 2 weeks, that's where they kind of like, oh my gosh, what's going on with my bowels, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
But
same.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. But once they get past that stage and their brains start firing, they're like, whoa, this is pretty powerful.
Mm.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question, Ed?
Yeah, that was really good.
Thanks.
Yeah, so going off that topic, do you think that the carnivore diet is the best sort of, I know it's not a diet, but do you think it's the best sort of eating way compared to others, and why do you think that is the case? If it is.
So I guess I've seen the most powerful transformations using this protocol. So I do call it a mental and physical health protocol. And really for me, it's a no-brainer because of the amount of nutrients dense satiety that creates in eating red meat, right, and fat. And we are, as humans, fat and protein. That's who we are. So, I think it just makes sense to be able to go, well, hold on. Again, I'll actually share something too. I had a radio interview yesterday, which is you'll find this quite
Wow.
interesting. So
Yeah.
one of the hosts there in Queensland was talking about going on a carnivore diet, and so they got me in and had a chat. And one of the first questions they asked me was like, "Oh, is it healthy?" Which I find quite fascinating because I'm like, hold on, back up. If we're not questioning what we're putting in our trolleys and we're eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and we're eating Cocoa Pops, and we're eating, God forbid, those horrible noodles with those sachet things in them, or pre-played meals or whatever. It's interesting about the programming that we have the minute that we
Yeah.
talk about reducing plants and things.
Oh my
So,
God.
it's the psychological attachment to go, well, hold on, I don't think Cocoa Pops are too healthy either. But again, it's a perception. So it makes sense from a mental and physical health point, and even reversing type 2 diabetes, to basically get into either a low carb, high protein, high fat, ketogenic carnivore way of life, depending on what's individually going on for the person. I've worked with disordered people who have been vegans in the past. So, that doesn't work for a lot of people long term. I get attacked by the vegans. But it is what it is. We all do, I think, in the carnivore community. But again, I'm like, I know, if that's what brings you joy and that what brings you proper optimal mental and physical health, go for it. But I want to allow people to understand if they are eating veggies and cereals and all of these things and they're still sick and they're still sad, we need to change it. So I would always go low carb, straight into carnivore.
Cool.
Yep.
Optimal human, and I call a human species appropriate way of eating, because we are.
Yep.
That's what we are.
100%.
No cravings either, huh?
Oh my God.
Much reduced cravings. Oh my gosh.
It's like a cheat. It's like for people, because I had a bit of a binge eating thing, and I feel like you don't even need willpower. You don't need mental strength, because that fat, it gets rid of it. It's honestly blows my mind. Like
That's what I
people
said
like
before, right? Willpower doesn't work when you're eating a crappy diet. So the minute that you start
the leptin's
using,
turned on.
I know, right? And sugar, it turns on your brain. So it makes you hungry, and fat turns it off because it's 67% fat. That's your brain. And that's kind of also too, just to let you know what we touched on before, is guiding people in through that. So what we were speaking about, Ed, with the outcome of, well, if I'm stressed or I feel like I'm getting a craving, what would I normally do? I'd normally go for carbs because the body's sending you the glucose signal, right? I need this. But what we do, we put that in place of a new thought, feeling, and reaction. It's like, well, hold on. What's your emotion right now? What does that look like, sound like, feel like? If you're stressed, let's have some electrolytes. Let's get some salt in there. And generally that'll turn it off. If not, go to the fridge, slice up some frozen or cold butter and eat it, and watch what happens in 20 minutes. It disappears. Yeah. Who doesn't want to just go eat butter like that? Like, seriously.
Is that one of your go-to snacks, just butter?
It is. Yeah. But the other thing is like we were saying before, like we don't get cravings, but we actually become so happy and joyful. It's like, oh, I just want to eat all the butter because I can. But, we're also not restricting ourselves. It's like we just eat until we're fully satiated and then we stop.
Yeah.
And once people get the hang of that, because it is kind of different with some people. But also too, my go-to is cold bacon.
Just like out of the fridge or whatever.
So I cook it, put lots of salt on it, and I put it in the fridge.
Oh, okay. After you cook it, though. Okay.
After I cook it. Yeah, really good.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you made about how eating is so much more fun now. I remember even when I was eating kind of sugary foods that are more tasty or whatever, there'd just be this thing deep inside of me like, okay,
Yeah.
you have to stop soon. You have to stop soon. Okay, you're going way
Guilt.
too high in calories. You're
But
going
you
to feel
just
like
can't.
crap tomorrow. And yeah, so you can't genuinely just love and enjoy the food. But on Carnivore, for some
Oh.
reason, every single time I eat a meal, I'm just so happy eating, and I can eat as much as I want, and I know that it's amazing for my body. So
I know, right? And that's what people say to me, like, don't you get bored? I'm like, oh, you have no idea. It's like
Yeah,
I've
like,
eaten a steak for the first time in my life every time.
I know it tastes good every time. I think that's the one food that I swear I can just eat every single day. Steak
Can I
is
tell
just
you why? So what happens is, right, when we eat such a sad diet, we actually lose our instinct to actually what real hunger is, right? And our taste buds become so conditioned. So again, we're conditioning our body. But what happens with removing all of that, our taste buds change. So this just becomes an instinct of human thriving to eat this stuff, right? So this is the signal that we get. It's like, okay, I need some fat, I need some fuel. Whereas before we lose all of that. But the other thing is, which is what I teach people, if you're eating a steak and it's amazing and it's the best thing you've ever had, that's telling you your instincts in just eat. Once you eat it again, if you've got two steaks in front of you and you get halfway through the next one, but you're like, oh, I don't know, it's changed taste or I just don't really want it, you're done. Stop.
100%.
Or if you feel like you need to eat, and then I'll say to people, okay, go and get whatever you've got, cook it up. But if you eat it and you're not like going, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever eaten, you're not hungry. You're probably thirsty. Have some sodium or, some electrolytes, and then give it an hour or two, and then you'll know if you're truly instinctively hungry.
So
yeah.
with the carnivore diet, do you ever with your patients ever implement fructose or fruit, or do you think that's too much of a slippery slope, or there's just no need for sugar on the brain?
Depends on where they've come from. So if they've come from a very addictive sugar background, no, definitely not. I have a client that's popped in my head right now. She had some berries the other day and she was just like, oh God, they tasted disgusting. I don't want them. I'm like, great, excellent. Because your body's telling you don't want them. It does depend, Daniel, on the addiction process and also to just calming down the attachment to restriction versus freedom. I get people into a state where they're like, I can have them. Of course I can. But do I actually want them?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't eat fructose. I haven't eaten fruit for over 8 years.
Wow. That's so good.
Don't like it. It's disgusting.
Yeah, because we're learning a lot more about the damage of fructose on the brain, and it actually destroys the same part of the brain as methamphetamine and to the same effect.
It's a drug.
Yeah.
It metabolizes in the liver the same way as alcohol. It turns into alcohol, and that's why
Yeah,
if you think about
ethanol,
kids now with non-alcoholic fatty liver,
the
it's
same.
all the
Yeah.
sugar, right? It's
Oh my
insane.
gosh.
And seed oils, please stay away from seed oils. Toxic as, yeah. Look again. It's just proof that once you get your body into a heightened condition of instinct of species function, that's just all you need to thrive on. Same with alcohol. I've got clients that'll go, I used to want to go out and have a vodka or a wine. I'm like, I just don't want it, because what happens is they pick it up and they smell it. And then that instinct of going, I don't want that, that's toxic. So this is the power of understanding the innate instinct of your body actually helping you. Whereas the other way, when you're fully loaded with toxicity, that all goes out the window. You just have no instinct or concept of what's going on.
That does make a lot of sense. Like if you're eating in the way that you're meant to be eating, your instincts will be correct, and then you can.
Yeah, and guess what? We don't get hangry anymore, right?
No.
We're not like
Never
sugar roller coasters every day, and that's one of the biggest things I always hear. It's just like, I don't think about food. I've got all these hours in my head that I'm not attached with food.
So good, actually. Yeah.
It's amazing. And how easy is it? And how quickly does it take now to shop? Like literally, I go into the butcher's, it takes me 15 minutes and I'm home.
Yeah.
I'm done.
It's the best thing ever.
Best thing ever.
Yeah.
A lot of people say that fiber is really good for your gut and it cleans out your gut and stuff. And obviously, we know that this necessarily isn't the case. So what's your thoughts on fiber with the
Fiber.
gut and that connection with the brain as well?
Well, again, I always look at where does this come from, who paid for these studies. Again, fiber is just waste byproduct of all the stuff you've eaten, that, the plants and all the other stuff that are like cellulose that your body can't break down. So like, we're not a cow. We don't have 4 stomachs. We only have 1. So we're sitting there with all of that stuff sitting in our colon. And, even Dr. Paul Mason in Sydney talks about this a lot. Fiber actually backs you up and can make you more constipated and cause more issues. Whereas, there was a study I think he was speaking about with non-fiber diet and a fiber diet, and the non-fiber diet had such more heightened responses, as in, no constipation, functional better, as in like, gut reaction, like not going to the toilet all the time. So yeah, fiber, again, it's like I'll always question, like, okay, where does that paid come from? Yeah, it's the same with again, if we talk about the meat narrative, it's exactly the same thing. It's just like, okay, sure, climate change, meat narrative, all that kind of thing, we know where it comes from.
Yeah.
Do you think the future of like psychology and sort of mental health stuff going forward, do you think that because of the anecdotal evidence of the carnivore diet, it will slowly start to be introduced a little bit more?
I would hope so. Look, going to university and doing psychology, I don't think so. I think it would have to be something that someone would have to do externally. But again, it's very difficult. So when someone's going through a structure where we're told a certain thing, so you believe that and you value that, and you come out on the other side, so anything can oppose. So cognitive dissonance of like, well, hold on, I've spent 4 years studying psychology, but now you're telling me that I need to actually talk about the gut as well. I've got colleagues that are psychologists, and we kind of always sometimes clash about, my work and their work. And I'm like, well, you know what? I love you where you're at. You love me where I'm at. You go do your thing and I'll go do my thing. So I think doctors as well. I know there's far more now that are starting to open up to the idea. But again, we talk about clinical studies or peer-reviewed studies. My clients couldn't care if there was a peer-reviewed study talking about carnivore. I know Harvard have done one for 6+ months and they don't care. And this is the thing. Yeah, it's anecdotal, but you know what? If someone's reversed their depression or anxiety, or just put their health through the roof, or reverse their type 2 diabetes, that's all they need. They don't need anything else. But also too, the other really scary thing in the psychiatry element, and I think nutritional psychiatry, it's only kind of new-ish, probably in that label. But a lot of psychiatrists also don't believe in that gut-brain connection, right? Whereas to the point, and I'll just use a reference here with someone I know in Norway. She contacted me and she'd been on a carnivore diet for about 8 weeks and literally reversed her depression and anxiety. She'd had it for years, like 6 weeks. She woke up and she was like, wow, this is amazing. But every day she's got better and better and better, and then went back to her psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, no, you really need to stop eating that way. That's going to give you a heart attack and it's really bad for you.
To me.
And we'll give you some medication to manage your symptoms.
Wow.
She was devastated. So guess what she did? She went off it because she got scared and she was fearful she'd die of a heart attack.
Oh my gosh, there's doctors so tragic. Bad.
So, I think for what we do, and, getting out the collective message, and, having a collective consciousness on this, and allowing people to, we can open the door for people and we can show them, we can talk to them, but, they've got to be the ones that have got to step through and really be empowered. I think the industry is very disempowering.
100% agreed. Anyway, thank you so much, Natalie, for your time. It's been awesome speaking with you.
Thanks,
there's still so much more to talk about, and definitely we'll make another one of these. So awesome. Natalie, do you want to just tell all the viewers where they can find you?
Yeah, amazing. So you can find me just on Instagram and Facebook, so Natalie E. West, and also to my website is nataliewest.com. And there's a little section there where you can say, let's start here. So I do a little 30-minute free introduction call for anyone that wants to kind of have a chat with me. And that's pretty much it. But, you guys too, well done on your little journey, and, three months in, amazing.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on. See ya.